What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I want to jump on here today, just kind of get my thoughts on the Pittsburgh Steelers over the first quarter of the season. Even though it's not really the first quarter, this whole like 17-week schedule thing instead of 16 games just makes things like unclean and uneven for me. But they are 3-1, sitting pretty at the top of the AFC North. All three AFC North teams took losses this past weekend, so a pretty good week to be on the bye. But instead of doing like a stock watch thing like we did at the quarter points last year, I kind of just wanted to jump on here and give like a broad overview of the team right now, what's working, where they kind of need to improve, all that stuff, as we kind of jump into what'll be week 6 of the NFL season with Cleveland on the slate this coming weekend. Just before we get started, if you guys could do me a favor, like the video, subscribe, drop me a comment to let me know what you guys think about this video. Also, your expectations, like have they changed since the summer, anything like that, any questions that you guys have for me moving forward. Also, I spent most of the bye week catching up on the 2026 quarterback class and kind of resetting my rankings and all that stuff, which was a lot of fun. But I will put the link to all of my written work per usual in the description of this video. If you guys are interested, you can go read that stuff over there. But right now, if you look at the Vegas odds this morning, they still have the Baltimore Ravens as the favorites in the AFC North, despite them being 1-4. They have the Rams coming up this weekend without the possibility of Lamar Jackson being in uniform. Their schedule does lighten up quite a bit after their bye week, which I think is the week after. But if we're being honest, man, like the Steelers have absolutely no reason not to take this division. It is there for the taking. Of course, we'll preview the Browns game this coming weekend, just like we always do. But, when you're at home, it's versus a rookie quarterback in his second career start. I don't think that Dillon Gabriel played all that well this past weekend. Other people seem to disagree with me. But following that, you got a quick turnaround to Cincy. I definitely acknowledge the divisional road game on a short week. Those things are tough, but the Bengals look completely dead in the water, just totally unfunctional on both sides of the ball. So not only do they have a chance to kind of create some separation in the division over the next like 10 days or so, but they have a chance to really start gaining some respect around the league. There's really no reason that they shouldn't win both of these games by 2 scores. There's no reason that they shouldn't be 5-1 heading into that Packers matchup. But just before kind of evaluating each side of the ball, in great detail, I kind of just want to point out like some of the reasons that the Steelers are 3-1, and it's not just like the Tomlin like voodoo magic stuff. The Steelers are last in the league in terms of accruing penalties. So when you're doing that, plus winning the turnover battle, and then you definitely have one of the league's best kickers, you're going to be able to stay in games, and you're always going to have a chance. But just starting with the offense, I think, really starts at the quarterback position with Rodgers. I think Rodgers has been completely fine this year. The numbers are pretty solid. He's 16th in EPA per play, 25th in success rate. The Steelers offense is 14th in points per drive with him under center. I think if you would have told everybody that they would have been like middle of the pack and like most offensive metrics coming in, we would have all been pretty happy with that. He's taken a real like point guard approach to kind of help manage the game. The underneath passing game has been really, really effective. He's helped them improve the red zone offense as well. They're top 10 in red zone efficiency. They're right now, I think they're 8th in terms of touchdowns in the red zone. But you look at Rodgers' numbers and kind of some of the differences between like this year and last year with him and with the Jets. Right now, he's 7th among quarterbacks in EPA per dropback on quick throws under 2.5 seconds. He was 32nd in that metric last year. So it's just been like better results in terms of when he's getting the ball out quickly. Until teams stop it, like they should keep punishing them. A big talking point has been like the average depth of target. His 5.1 yards of ADOT is the lowest since 2006. So I think it's fair to, kind of question the sustainability of this model. I don't think that this is going to work for a full season into the playoffs, but we'll find out in due time. And when the adjustments are there and they need to make them, we'll see if he's still got the change up in his arsenal to play a different way. But the area where I think he struggled the most has just been like when he's under pressure, which hasn't been that much because he's getting the ball out so quickly. But you look at some of the numbers, he's 10 of 27 with 9 sacks, 3 turnover worthy plays when heated up this season on 36 dropbacks. Overall, I think it's been like about what I expected. I said coming into the season that I think Rodgers, even at his age, like with some of the limitations that he comes with, he's just an easier player to kind of game plan and scheme up around than a guy like Russ was. So I think in that regard, that's one of the reasons why I'm like more optimistic about this group going forward. As opposed to last year where they kind of had some hot moments and then kind of cooled off. We'll see what happens though. Just I think figuring out some way to kind of get some semblance of like play action game would be really helpful. They're 26th in success rate off play action passes this season and really haven't been able to push the ball down the field very much after the week one opener against the Jets. So that'll be something I'm keeping an eye on coming out of the bye week. But the run game, man, like it's been really efficient, trending in the right direction. They're fourth in rushing success rate right now, which is freaking awesome. Of course, that small sample size, and they were insane against the Vikings, which kind of helped boost those numbers. But I think Jalen Warren's playing extremely well. He's forced 14 missed tackles on 43 carries. That was a stat that I wanted to look up before jumping on here. That's really, really impressive. And honestly, I got to give some respect to Kenneth Gainwell coming off that career game in Ireland. Just did not think that he had that in his bag, and he's just been better than I imagined over the last couple of weeks, running pretty hard. And then, kind of as I've said for several years now, I just want to see them continually expand the run game menu. I just think it makes you so much more difficult to defend. But they've had some success, got some really nice counter runs last week with Darnell Washington in the game. I think continuing to play number 80 as much as possible will help them, establish the run, hold up the line of scrimmage, and kind of generate some displacement up front. But the run blocking as a whole, I think it's been really spotty, to be honest with you. The backs have kind of made it look better than I think what it actually is. I think there's just been too many blown assignments. You're getting too many run throughs through the A and the B gap. Even last week's game where they had like pretty good results, I still think there's just it's too many blown assignments. I'll just say that. Guys not working collectively. I think individually they've been better than they have been as a collective. And I think that there's just been some growing pains for all of the youth up front. I think they're still struggling to pass off some stunts and pass protection, but you're just looking for growth as the season continues to move on. You got four guys up front playing on rookie contracts. I think there's just been some peaks and valleys associated with that, but the offensive line is going to go a long way in determining like what the ceiling for this group can really be throughout this season, but also like moving forward as you're talking about potentially putting a young quarterback under center next year. DK's been a good addition so far. I think that the breakout game last week was really nice. I thought the ways that they used him was really thoughtful, moving him around the formation, getting him playing a little bit more from a condensed split or in the slot was good to see, but maybe just not as productive in the ways that we're used to seeing with DK, just because of the structure of the offense, with them really being like an underneath passing attack, a lot of like horizontal stuff instead of like using him as much vertically. But he still found ways to impact the game and produce explosives. I think that was one of the things we talked about coming into the season was, when you make that significant investment to go trade a premium draft pick for this guy, and then you pay him like a top 5 wide receiver. I think it was the Steelers telling us that they thought there was more to be untapped with his game beyond just being a guy that can run down the field and create those explosives down the sideline. You're seeing him being really good after the catch. Like he's averaging 12.5 yards after the catch this season, the most among NFL receivers by a wide margin. I think second place was like 8.5 or something like that, according to PFF. So that's just it's been crazy the amount of yards that he's been able to accumulate, like with the ball in his hands. And Calvin's working more outside this year. I think the film has been like solid. The production hasn't been great, but he's a high effort. He's a nice complementary piece, and I think he's definitely like proven himself to at least be like a baseline like wide receiver 3 in the league. He's just kind of being like miscast as a number 2 guy, in my opinion, right now. But he was banged up before the bye. I think Calvin could definitely have a good role in this offense. I think it leaves more questions about like, will we see a little bit of Roman Wilson in the short term? He wasn't playing very much over the first 4 weeks. Scotty Miller, Ben Skoranek working in a little bit more, but I've gotten a lot of questions about whether the Steelers could make a move at wide receiver, in the next couple of weeks. I think Jacoby Myers' name is one that's been coming up a lot with the Raiders being off to such a slow start. I would love to get Myers. I think that, you got a question about whether Omar Khan would be willing to, fork up some draft capital, knowing that they've been really intentional about accumulating all these assets just in case they have to move up next April. for a passer or anything like that. But Myers is a guy that I've liked a lot. I did a film room on him on the channel last year. Really versatile, can play inside, outside, super tough, ultra reliable hands. And I think he's been one of the more underrated receivers in the league. So if you could get him for like a day 3 pick or a mid-round pick or something like that, and then give him a market value contract extension, that'd be a move that I'd be a fan of, just because I think, it's all about, not only giving yourself the best chance to make a run this year, which I think he would definitely help do that. He's a guy that can work over the middle of the field if you want to start accessing that area a little bit more, but also just giving another security blanket for a young quarterback next year. And that's really what I'm like focusing on, continuing to kind of insulate the environment as much as you possibly can and surround the quarterback with as much talent as possible. And that's nothing to say that like, I'm trying to like boot Calvin out of the way. I think he's a really useful player. I just think the team needs like more firepower in the passing game when they start going up against some of these better teams, not only in the AFC, but, just as the schedule continues to move on. I think the tight end position is how the Steelers wanted to kind of attack that problem this all season. You go out and you trade for Jonnu Smith. And I just think that vision that they had coming into the year hasn't really formulated, at least to date. And I had my own questions about how that marriage between Freiermuth and Smith was actually going to go. But I think if you look at it from a production standpoint, it's definitely been the most disappointing part of the team. I looked this up over the weekend, but among 37 qualifying tight ends, Freiermuth's 27th and Smith is 29th in yards per route run. Pat just hasn't really been separating, I think, as well as he was even like last year. Just doesn't really seem like he's been on the same page with Rodgers on a couple different occasions, one way or another. And then Smith has really just been used as kind of like a gadget underneath guy. I think like most of his targets have come on screens, which that's kind of like the player that he is. It's really difficult when you look at the production that you're getting from both those guys, and then you consider that they're both guys that are making, 10 million in terms of like base salary. It's just difficult to kind of stomach that a little bit. But with what Washington brings to the table as a blocker in the run game, it's just really hard to take him off the field, to be honest with you. One thing I'll be watching down the stretch is just the distribution of labor, like how they get these guys incorporated into the offense. I know there's only so many targets to go around when you're in a run heavy, run first offense. I totally understand that. But there's definitely room for improvement for those guys to play better, for Smith to do a little bit better job getting them involved and just getting them on the same page as the quarterback, because they're going to need to score points for sure. So, just moving on to kind of the defensive side of the ball, the numbers, I think, they're below average, certainly worse than I anticipated coming into the year, knowing the quarterbacks that they were going to be playing on the early part of the schedule. Although I will say, like, guys like Sam Darnold's been like unconscious this season. And then like even Drake May's taken a leap forward. So I think that probably looks better now than it did a couple months ago. But, they're 23rd in points per drive, 24th in EPA per play, 20th in success rate. So, like I've said on the podcast, like with John, I've reiterated this a couple times, but I just think that this defense is too talented for them not to turn things around. Like they do have certain weaknesses, and we've seen them do a little bit better over the past 2 weeks to kind of mask those, especially as it comes to stopping the run. But I think that better days are definitely ahead, and I still anticipate that the defense will outperform the offense the rest of the way. But some of the adjustments in the run game, in terms of like the stunts, blitzes have been enough to kind of mask some of their deficiencies, like I talked about along the interior, particularly with Benton. Like he's playing out of position. You want to try to find a ways to kind of not have him get just completely washed out of plays. I think at some point this week, when I return home, I'm going to try to take a deep dive on Derek Harmon's film. I think overall he's been pretty solid. Hayward's still playing at an unbelievable level in terms of like setting the point at the point of attack and being able to lock guys out and play the run. You just hope that he's able to kind of sustain this throughout the season and, stay healthy is the biggest thing. But I think Patrick Queen has really been the biggest benefactor, I think, to this more aggressive play style, this downhill approach that they've kind of deployed more of this season. He's got 10 run stops through 4 games. He had 18 all of last season. So you just see like the drastic difference. He's just making more plays in the backfield. And I just think that that's the best way to use him, getting him downhill more, even incorporating him in more into the blitz the blitz game, excuse me, I think is just a better use of his skill set, like his explosiveness downhill, his quick trigger ability. It's just better when he doesn't have to think as much. He can just really like kind of be a seek and destroy type of player. One thing that I think that really needs to improve that we haven't talked about enough as a collective whole on social media or on this podcast is they just got to tackle better. Going back and watching a couple of the games, they just have not tackled consistently. Not I want to see like more hats to the ball for sure, but just better tackling technique in the open field, especially when you're playing this aggressive play style. You just open yourself up to explosive plays. And, they've missed 38 tackles through 4 games. That's the fourth most in the NFL. And, they've played one less game than a lot of these other squads have. So just continually tackling better in open space. I think getting some guys back healthy will be huge. Deshaun Elliott's already came back. I think that'll make a huge difference. But in terms of like how they're playing up front, I mentioned like the aggressive play style. Their blitz rate is up this year. I think it's like almost like 35%. It was 27% last year. I think that's a change that it seemed like everybody was kind of wanting going into the season. It seems like that's something that Tara Austin made a priority. I don't think the pressure pass that they've came up with have been overly complicated. It's been pretty straightforward. It's a lot of 5-6 man rushes with man coverage behind it. One thing that they're giving the linebackers the ability to do, whether it's Queen or whether it's Wilson, it's just like triggering on some of these like green dogs. So if you've got the back in man coverage, whoever has the back, if they stay in the block, you immediately just pressure the quarterback. And even if those guys are just chipping, like we saw an example of that happen with Patrick Queen against the Vikings, the back went out to chip TJ Watt. Queen noticed that the quarterback was holding the ball a little bit too long in the pocket, just immediately triggered, landed a big hit. It gets a stop for the defense in the red zone. So I think, they did have another like cool kind of zone pressure where they played quarters behind it against the Vikings that I kind of wanted to tweet out a little bit maybe later today. So just continually finding ways to get pressure on the quarterback. They are stunting a little bit more as well, but the results, like in terms of getting pressure, have been good. They're sixth in pressure rate, they're fourth in sack percentage. Again, those are good numbers. Those are what you expect when you place this type of investment along the defensive side of the ball. Nick Herbig continues to be a stud. I'm always impressed, like just with the way that he can, come off the bench and provide splash plays, man. Like I tweeted this out, but he started 7 games for the Steelers so far in his career. We're 3 years in now. He's got 5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, like 13 quarterbacks hits in those games. So like if you extrapolate that into a full season's worth of work, you'd be looking at a 12 sack type of player. And the Steelers have a luxury with 3 really good edge rushers between Watt, Highsmith. He just makes plays, and I think that getting Highsmith back is going to allow them to not only keep everybody fresh through the rigors of the season. You want those guys feeling really good come playoff time. Hopefully, they make it, but also like, get really creative in terms of some of these 3 edge sets, continually trying to find out, if one of these guys can potentially, rush over the B gap. That way you can get your best players on the field, on passing downs. I will say that their efficiency when like rushing only 4 guys is down this year a little bit. I think you've seen it pop up maybe a time or two. It's not something that I'm like overly concerned about given the small sample size, but it is something that I kind of wanted to bring up just because I haven't seen anybody really talking about it. But they're 31st in success rate when they're not blitzing, which I thought was kind of interesting defensively. But the secondary, like I said, it feels different when Deshaun Elliott's back here. Like, not only do I think he's a really good communicator, it just feels like last season it kind of felt like he had a really strong year, but it was like, okay, is he really going to replicate this? Because he's never really been viewed as like a difference maker on the back end, but it just feels like he's kind of leveled up, like going from, a quality role player who's not going to make a lot of mistakes to like a legit difference maker. I mean, he's turning the ball over in addition to the things that he gives you in the box, like as a run defender and as a tackler. But, the cornerback depth has been really solid. I think that the Brandon Echols signing has been really inspiring from Omar Khan. Like, I think he's played pretty good ball. And even like James Pierre, like coming in and like playing the way that he did last week against the Vikings, I think that the Steelers have kind of, again, insulated themselves like in the event of injuries. And, it's just, you look around the league, the Steelers are off, yesterday and I'm watching all these different games. I'm seeing some of the units that teams are putting out there at the cornerback position. It's like so many of these guys just cannot play. And I think the Steelers have, four guys for sure that I think you feel at least comfortable with, that they're not just going to get, exploited on the back end when they're playing single coverage. And I think that Ramsey and Slay in general on film have been kind of up and down. That's kind of just the nature of the position, especially when you got two guys that are over 30. I think the scheme kind of does put them in some really difficult situations. I mean, they're still playing, middle field close coverage at the second highest rate in the entire league. So you're going to be facing a lot of one-on-ones on the outside. The ball's coming out quick because you're trying to blitz, but, you're not getting a lot of help over the top. And I think that there are going to be certain matchups where the other team has, speed on the perimeter that it could give them some issues. Like moving forward, I'm kind of curious on like how they, match up against like Jamar Chase, T Higgins coming up in a couple of days. Even if I don't believe in Jake Browning whatsoever, it's just one of those things where, Chase has the speed to kind of break a game open. Even like we saw yesterday, that granted they were down multiple scores, like he creates a couple explosive plays just on his own athletic ability. So, that'll be something to kind of monitor coming up. I still think I love the physicality that Ramsey brings to the table. And I even think that Slay has been fine in man-to-man coverage. It's just the biggest issue on the back end right now is just I think that as they continue to find ways to stop the run, they need to continue to disguise some more of their coverages on the back end to kind of buy an extra beat, make the quarterback's process a little bit more post-snap. And just the communication element has got to get situated. Just too many explosive plays allowed. They're near the top of the league. I don't know where they sit after this week, but I know coming into last week, they were like top 5 at explosive play rate allowed on defense. It's just not good enough. A lot of coverage busts. We saw a couple that kind of let the Vikings back in the game last weekend. So just streamlining the communication on the back end. They got a lot of veteran players. Like it's not like you're playing with a lot of youngsters back there. Granted, these guys don't have a ton of experience playing together, but you got to figure out a way to get everybody on the same page. And that'll be the number one thing I'm looking forward to seeing, like after the bye. Hopefully they're able to get Joey Porter Jr. back. I think that would certainly be helpful. And then you can kind of kick Ramsey back into the slot and streamline the communication with the same bodies on the field, no matter the down and distance. I think that will be really, really helpful for them. But yeah, better days ahead, I think, for the defense as a whole. Tougher tests ahead for the Steelers as a whole. I just did my mailbag for Steelers Now, and one of the questions I got was whether or not I thought the Steelers were one of the 4 best teams in the AFC. Kansas City and Buffalo are going to be there. Outside of that, man, I think it's wide open, man. Like everyone else is a question mark with huge unknowns. You got small sample sizes that we're dealing with here for sure. There's a real path for a home playoff game in front of them, which would obviously help them snap this drought that they've been in terms of playoff wins and things of that nature, kind of get the monkey out their back, if you would. But there's a lot to be really excited about just moving forward. And I'm ready to get back in the regular routine of things. I will say that this week, in terms of like content schedule, I think Nick Martin and I are going to be jumping on here to talk some NFL draft stuff, some rising prospects. So be on the lookout for that maybe midweek. And then I'll be hitting John up about like whether we're going to run the podcast this week or if we're going to wait until next week. I'll keep you guys posted on that. Ideally, I would like to get to one NFL quarterback prospect film room. Whether that's Fernando Mendoza. We've already done Sellers, Mendoza, Dante Moore for Oregon, maybe Alabama's Ty Simpson. I'm open to request on that, but I'd like to get something like that up. Of course, that'll be for YouTube channel members if you guys are interested in that. The link to become a channel member is in the description, as always, of this video. It's only like $4 a month. You guys can come try it out. No long-term commitment. There's a lot of stuff, additional content over there. The podcast with John, Jens Snowball, and then some additional film room stuff as well. But if you guys got anything else that you guys want to see, let me know. Otherwise, I will be back here in a couple of days. You guys have a great week. Peace and love.